Hi, welcome again. This is Jeff Iavino with Trellis Fine Wines, doing another installment of Vineyard VIPs. And we're fortunate and lucky to have Lindsay Hoopes with us today. Hoopes Family Vineyards is a part of the Trellis portfolio with a beautiful array of wines, all from the Napa Valley area in California. So wanted to say hello, welcome.
Cheers.
To Boston, cheers. And excited to have you here today as I spill my glass. But more importantly, great opportunity to talk about your wines, a little bit about the Hoopes family, a little bit of the history about your wines, and the fact that we now represent them in Massachusetts.
Well, thank you very much. It's a very great pleasure to be here in Massachusetts, and thank you so much for working with us.
Yeah.
I think we have a really interesting story to tell. We're a very, very small winery. We actually are entirely now female run and operated, and there are only about three of us, exactly three of us, in the winery. So I actually manage all of our vineyard operations, sales, distribution, and pretty much everything else. And our winemakers are a fabulous team, and we leave them to focus on actually making the beautiful products that you get to taste here. Our head winemaker, is a woman named Ann Botter. She was Heidi Barrett's assistant for a number of years, about 8 years, on pretty much every project that Heidi worked on. Our assistant winemaker is Jennifer Rue, who used to work for Minor Family Estates. So between the two of them, they've worked with probably every great Cabernet vineyard, specifically in the Oakville region, and very many in Napa Valley, and we're very lucky to have them. They started with our team in 2012 and have been making our wines ever since. Prior to that, my father actually started the business. He began as a grower from 1983 until 1999. He grew grapes for a number of the famous Oakville estates that you probably drink wines from today, and it really, really built the reputation of Napa Valley. He was well known because some of our vineyards actually survived the phylloxera outbreak in the early 1990s, and so people wanted to recognize him for great farm and wine growing, essentially, or grape growing, and wanted to use his name as a single vineyard designation on their labels. So being the very smart man that he is, he said, if somebody else thinks my name is worthwhile putting on a bottle of wine, I think I'm going to do it myself, and that was how the brand was born. So our first vintage was in 1999. My father started with just one single vineyard wine out of this particular vineyard, and we ended up expanding over the years with the great success and following that we built through really just word of mouth by bringing vineyards that we were managing for other people back in-house. So we have grown, but very organically. We work with all vineyards that have been in production for probably the biggest names in the valley for a number of years, but now we have our new team in place of all ladies and young entrepreneurial spirits, I suppose.
Excellent. So a little bit about, I know that the portfolio is red wine dominant, but we have a lovely Chardonnay, which in our portfolio is very unique to us because of the complexity and the way that it's made. So if you can touch on the Chardonnay, and then we can kind of talk about the difference of the Cabernets. But the Chardonnay is honestly my favorite out of the entire portfolio. And I am not a Chardonnay drinker until this. So a little bit about the Chardonnay and then the Cabs.
Sure. Most of our vineyards are located in the Oakville and Yountville areas of Napa, which makes them essentially, if you threw a dart at Napa Valley and hit the bullseye, that's where we are. We're right in the epicenter. And typically that region is known for growing Cabernet. It's because it's one of the hottest areas of Napa Valley, and it's on the valley floor. So most of the vineyards are completely exposed to the sun through the summer months, which is great for Cabernet and really, really helps them ripen. But it's not necessarily as good as Chardonnay. Most of the Chardonnays out of Napa Valley come out of the Carneros region, which is closer to the San Francisco Bay. But we actually do have a vineyard that is on the eastern side of Yountville Hill, and it is this particular Chardonnay vineyard. And because it's a warm weather vineyard, I think you're going to get a lot of really interesting flavor profiles. That might be one of the reasons you find that it stands out, because it is not typical to Napa. We have a lot more tropicality, a lot of citrus, and sort of bright fruit, crisp flavor profiles. And that is because of the heat that those grapes endure. It's difficult to farm because you have to, walk a very fine line of making sure that the grapes don't get sunburned, literally, just like we would. And so, we have to make sure that we can develop those fruit profiles without, running the risk of the quality of the grapes. But additionally, our style kind of across the board, and it's true with our Chardonnay as well, is very old world meets new world. So my father really wanted to showcase Napa and their terroir, but didn't want to kind of follow in the footsteps of a lot of Napa winemakers who were making their winemaking style, as opposed to the grape, sort of the center of the wine. And so having sort of a terroir-driven philosophy, I think that came from his background as a grower first, and then of course his love for French wines in general. We wanted to have a very hands-off winemaking process and just show kind of the naked, unadulterated grape and show what different vineyards within Napa can do. So this particular wine is only barrel fermented in 10%, and it's stainless steel, 90%, and then we don't send it through malolactic fermentation, which for those of you who know a little bit about winemaking, that's why some white wines taste buttery. And because they don't have skin contact, you sense it more in white wines, definitely. It's a natural process, there's nothing wrong with it, it's just a different style. So what we wanted to do is take out the butter, but we let it sit on the yeast for about 10 months so that we can get that kind of roundness and body that people associate with Napa Chardonnays. So you get the cream without the butter, and who can't cheers to that?
It's true. So the reason I brought these two is these are the single vineyard wines within the portfolio, both with great stories. So, you know, there's two other wines within the group, but these are the single vineyard wines. So if we could talk a little bit about the Hoopes and then the fun little story about Liparita, which I love.
Absolutely. So yes, the Chardonnay is also a single vineyard.
Correct.
So this is a Yountville single vineyard. It's called Charmer Vineyard. Also not that exciting, but these two particular wines are single vineyard Cabernets, and I think, in my opinion, the two most exciting Cabernets that we have in our portfolio for a number of reasons. Both sites are actually very diverse from one another. So if you taste the two wines side by side, I think you get an amazing appreciation for how diverse the wine growing region in Napa is. They are not very far from one another, yet they have completely different soil series, they have completely different age of vine, and fundamentally that is what makes winemaking interesting, because every site has a story to tell. So this particular wine, the Liparita, is a benchlands vineyard. So that means that it has, it's sort of as the valley slopes and starts to increase in altitude, we have a slight elevation of 500 feet. But the soil series is the same as any of the Howell Mountain or Spring Mountain, more, mountainous areas of Napa Valley. So you kind of have the love child, if you will, of Oakville or Rutherford, the other very well-known regions of Cabernet, and a Howell Mountain, because you've got the heat due to the fact that the elevation is still quite low. It's a southeasterly facing vineyard, which means that it's completely exposed to the sun for the majority of the day. So you're getting a lot of great heat and sun, and so we don't struggle with the temperature problems that a lot of people have in mountain vineyards, which is great for us in that perspective. Yountville is a slightly lesser known appellation for wine making. Of course, Thomas Keller has made the town quite popular, but as far as winemaking, it's one of the younger appellations, actually. It was number 14 of 16 to be designated as its own geographic region. So I think what makes this particular wine is exciting is it's one of the very few Yountville wines on the market, and Yountville has, again, those sort of pitches and elevation that Oakville does not have. So you're getting sort of a new frontier of Cabernet that makes it very unique in the marketplace. I get a lot of minerality, I get a lot of sort of blue fruit, and typically I find that in the Valley Floor we're talking more of a red fruit profile. So it's a really fun, luscious, sexy wine. This wine actually won #1 cab in the world at Texom not that long ago, so we're very proud of that. And I think that, as far as the next frontier of Napa Cabernets and what you can see to expect, this is going to be a leader in that area.
Absolutely.
And then on the Hoopes Oakville Vineyard, that vineyard is very nostalgic for me. It's very special. That was the first vineyard that my father planted, and actually I grew up there. That's why I like to say the wine tastes better from there than anything else. But that was, sort of what got us into the business, helped us build our reputation, and, really was how we established who we are in the wine industry. Not that we don't care about every other wine, but this was sort of how we first put our foot forward. And so we do really care every year about how this wine is produced. Very interestingly, it's an old vine Cabernet. So we planted in 1983. We did not have to replant during the phylloxera outbreak, which is extremely rare. It makes it the oldest contiguous vineyard in this area of Napa that predates phylloxera. So we've got very, very old vines. They're older than most of the vines in France as well. So this gives you a really interesting glimpse into old vine Cabernet from Napa and what the wines used to taste like in the early 1980s. The clone that we used is a Bordeaux Wente clone. So again, keeping with the theme of old world, the flavor profile is not necessarily typical to Napa Valley. We've got some really, really beautiful kind of sage and herbaceous notes, as well as that very typically Napa earthy cigar box tobacco, and then blended amazingly well, because our winemakers are so talented, with really bright fruit flavors. So we've got a lot of really great cassis and blackcurrant. And again, this one is going to be more on the red fruit profile because it is very sort of centrally located in the valley floor. We have 3 different soil types in this particular area. So we have volcanic soil, which is extremely rare in the valley floor. They think that Tokelon Vineyard, which is due west, part of that vineyard during the formation of the valley broke off and became the Yountville Hill. So if you think about this vineyard, for those of you who are fans of Napa Valley, it's kind of like Tokelon meets Sellinger in terms of soil series. And then we have a lot of clay loam because we're right next to the Napa River. So we get natural flooding, new alluvial soils that regenerate, the nutrients and the flavor profiles year over year. So it's completely sustainable, organically farmed, and generally, is its own ecosystem because it floods and keeps itself watered and healthy year over year. So it's an amazing, amazing site. And I really encourage you to, try this wine, because I think that, it really speaks to Oakville and what Oakville was at the beginning of this new wave of winemaking starting in, late 70s, 80s.
Excellent. So obviously there's a dog on the front of the
Yes.
label. And can we talk about Dante? Because it's not a gimmicky label. It's an actual story and a real dog that is a huge part of your family and why he was celebrated by being put on the label.
Yes, Dante was my father's favorite child, so he got the label, I got the job, and I didn't get the job easily either, by the way, but he was with us for about 19 years and was definitely my father's best friend. So he sat in the front seat of the car, he went to every bottling, every harvest. Dante used to scare the turkeys away who come and eat our grapes from Yountville Hill, actually, so he had a very, very integral role in our family. So when my mother was tasked to design the label in 1999, we said, well, what's the best way to represent our entire family? My mom designed the label, my dad was making the wine. We couldn't leave Dante out.
Right.
So Dante has been gracing the label since 1999. And we do have 2 new rescue dogs that we adopted the year that Dante passed away. Maya and Sophie, they are adorable, not quite as useful around the vineyard, but still nonetheless very cute. And so we named a wine after them as well, which is one of the wines in our portfolio that we started producing in 2009, which is the Mutt, because it was wine that we rescued from leaving our vineyard and going to other vineyards. So it was named after our rescue dogs.
Awesome. Great story. Couldn't be happier to have you here this week. And if you don't know about Lindsay, she actually went to school here during high school, so she has a lot of roots and a lot of memories of Massachusetts. So we know that you'll be back frequently. So thank you for being part of Trellis Fine Wines and being here in Massachusetts. And we had a great week.
Thank you so much.
Cheers.
Thanks.